Ethan Caldwell stood just beyond the grand oak doors of the ballroom, the swell of music and soft chatter washing over him like a tide he had trained himself to navigate countless times before. His tailored midnight blue suit fit him impeccably, the crisp white shirt beneath starched and pristine, a subtle silk tie knotted with practiced precision. The polished black shoes reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead, casting fragmented light onto the marble floor. This was the moment he had worked toward for years, a meticulous orchestration of wealth, influence, and social ascendancy culminating in his wedding to Lily Ashford, a union that promised to cement his place among the city's elite. The venue was a masterpiece of opulence. Towering floral arrangements of white orchids and pale roses flanked the entrance. Delicate candlelight flickered across tables draped in ivory linens, and the guests, dressed in their finest, murmured excitedly, their champagne flutes tinkling in anticipation. The air was heavy with expectation, a silent pressure that Ethan felt keenly, even amid the celebration. This was more than a wedding. It was an event designed to impress boardroom rivals, solidify alliances, and broadcast his arrival at the pinnacle of success. Lily stood at the end of the aisle, poised and radiant in her lace gown, her delicate features framed by a cascade of chestnut curls. Her smile was warm but measured, a practiced grace that suggested she, too, understood the weight carried by this ceremony. The Ashford family, with their storied legacy in finance and social circles, watched expectantly, their approval essential to Ethan's ambitions. Together, Ethan and Lily represented not just a couple, but a merger of fortunes and reputations, a partnership that promised power and prestige. Yet beneath the polished surface, Ethan felt a subtle disquiet. The familiar rush of adrenaline he usually welcomed before such moments was tinged with a strange unease, a whisper that something was amiss despite the flawless planning. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the faces, the old friends, business associates, and distant relatives, all gathered to witness what was supposed to be a flawless union. But his eyes caught on a figure near the corner, arranging last-minute details with a quiet intensity that stood apart from the rest. Grace. The name echoed in his mind with unexpected clarity. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose bun, strands escaping to frame a face that had once been the center of his world. The wedding planner moved with confident efficiency, but it was the look in her eyes that stopped Ethan cold, a mixture of calm professionalism and something more guarded, something that tugged at memories he had long tried to bury. Grace, the woman he had loved years ago and thought he had left behind, was here now, orchestrating the event that was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter without her. For a moment, Ethan's carefully constructed world wavered. The years since their parting had been filled with ambition and calculated decisions, each step pushing him further away from the vulnerabilities they had shared. Yet seeing Grace here, amidst the glittering grandeur of the ballroom, stirred a flood of emotions he had not anticipated, regret, curiosity, and a lingering ache that he had tried to suppress. He forced himself to breathe evenly, reminding himself that this was a professional encounter, nothing more. The wedding was about to begin, and all eyes would soon be on him and Lily. The success of this event was paramount, and distractions were luxuries he could ill afford. But as he adjusted his cufflinks and glanced toward the aisle where Lily waited, the image of Grace remained imprinted in his mind, a quiet reminder of a past that refused to be forgotten. The guests began to take their seats, the murmurs quieting as the string quartet launched into a soft prelude. Ethan's heart pounded steadily, each beat echoing the significance of the moment. He stepped forward, the polished floor beneath his feet reflecting the grandeur of the occasion. The doors at the far end opened, and Lily appeared, radiant and composed, her father offering an arm as they began their measured walk down the aisle. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on her, but his peripheral vision kept drifting back to Grace. She was now speaking quietly with an assistant, her expression unreadable but undeniably present. The years had changed them both. Grace's face bore the subtle marks of experience and resilience, while Ethan's carried the weight of ambition and sacrifice. Yet, in that crowded room filled with expectation and celebration, an invisible thread connected them, pulling at the edges of Ethan's carefully maintained composure. The ceremony progressed, vows exchanged with practiced sincerity, smiles offered to the cameras, and applause rising like a wave. Ethan's voice was steady as he spoke his promises, yet beneath the surface, his mind churned with questions and memories. How much of his success had cost him? What had he left unresolved with Grace? And more urgently, why was she here, at the center of an event that was supposed to mark a new beginning without her? As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted into cheers and the clinking of glasses. Ethan took Lily's hand firmly, the weight of the moment grounding him even as his thoughts spiraled. He smiled for the cameras and accepted congratulations, but inside, the unease lingered, a quiet storm beneath the surface. Later, as the reception unfolded with laughter and music, Ethan found himself drifting toward the corner where Grace had been working. The noise of the party dimmed in his ears as he approached, his steps measured but hesitant. Grace looked up, her eyes meeting his with a calm that both challenged and invited him to speak. Before words could form, Ethan's gaze was drawn to a small figure standing just behind Grace. A young boy, no more than 7 or 8, with curious eyes that seemed to study Ethan with a familiarity that sent a jolt through him. The child's features were strikingly familiar, echoing Ethan's own, and 1,000 questions surged to the forefront of his mind. Who was this boy? How did he come to be here? And what did Grace's presence, alongside this child, mean for the life Ethan had painstakingly built? The music swelled around them, the guests oblivious to the silent storm gathering in the corner of the ballroom. Ethan's carefully planned future suddenly seemed fragile, suspended on the edge of a revelation he was unprepared to face. The night, meant to celebrate a union of power and promise, was now shadowed by the uncertain weight of a past that refused to stay buried. Ethan's breath caught as his eyes locked with Grace's, the boy standing quietly beside her seeming to fade into the background, a muted presence in the charged silence between them. The soft hum of the reception, laughter, clinking glasses, and distant music became a distant murmur as a sudden, unfamiliar tension gripped him. He hadn't anticipated this moment, yet here it was. The past, embodied in the woman he had once loved, standing before him like a ghost from another life. Grace's gaze was steady, composed, but beneath that calm surface, Ethan sensed a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps apprehension, or a guarded hope. The years had etched lines of experience on her face, but her eyes held that same fierce determination he remembered, the kind that had drawn him to her in the first place. Yet tonight, that determination was tempered with restraint, as if she were measuring the risk of what they were about to confront. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Ethan's mind raced, a torrent of emotions and memories crashing against one another. The ease with which they had once shared dreams and secrets now felt like a distant echo, replaced by the weight of time, choices, and unspoken truths. The carefully built walls of his present life, the wedding, the status, the future, suddenly seemed fragile in the face of this unexpected reunion. His gaze flickered to the boy again. The child's wide eyes met his with an intensity that unnerved him, as though silently demanding answers he had no ready words for. Ethan felt a surge of confusion and unease, the kind that gnaws at the edges of certainty. Who was this boy? What place did he hold in Grace's life, and now, perhaps, in Ethan's? Finally, Ethan found his voice low and measured, betraying none of the turmoil he felt inside. "Grace," he said, the single word carrying years of unspoken history. "I didn't expect to see you here." She nodded slightly, a faint, guarded smile touching her lips. "I didn't expect to be here either," she replied, her tone calm but resolute. "But when I got the call to organize the wedding, I knew I couldn't say no. It's a significant event, and I'm good at what I do." Ethan studied her for a moment, searching for the line where professionalism ended and something more personal began. "And this is..." He gestured subtly toward the boy, who shifted slightly but remained silent, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Grace's expression softened just a fraction, and she glanced down at the child. "This is Noah," she said simply. "My son." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected, and Ethan felt a sudden tightening in his chest.
Noah.
The name was unfamiliar, but the boy's presence was undeniable, an intrusion into the carefully ordered world Ethan had constructed. His mind reeled, trying to place this new reality alongside the memories he had buried for so long. "Your son," Ethan repeated slowly, the weight of the phrase settling over him. I didn't know." Grace's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "No, you didn't. And I never told you, because I wasn't sure how you'd react. It was complicated, Ethan. Back then, our lives were moving in different directions." The confession stirred a mix of regret and defensiveness within him. He had left, chasing success and stability, convinced that ambition required sacrifice. Everything else could be set aside. But now, faced with the truth of Noah, he realized how much he had overlooked or perhaps chosen to ignore. Ethan swallowed hard, the room suddenly feeling smaller, the noise around them fading into insignificance. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked quietly. "At my wedding?" Grace's gaze flickered, and for a moment, vulnerability broke through her composed exterior. "Because you need to know. Because Noah deserves to know you, too. I've been watching from the sidelines, wondering if you ever thought about him." The admission pierced Ethan's carefully maintained armor. He had thought about Grace often enough, their shared laughter, the dreams they once built, but he had buried those memories beneath layers of ambition and resolve. The boy's presence was a living reminder of a past he had tried to leave behind, and yet, here he was, confronted with a reality that refused to be ignored. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure what to say. This changes everything." Grace nodded, understanding the enormity of his words. "I don't expect you to have answers right away. I just needed you to face it. We can figure out what comes next together or not. But the truth can't wait." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities and fears. Ethan's mind raced through 1,000 scenarios. How would Lily react if she knew? What would his family say? How would this revelation ripple through the carefully constructed life he was about to step fully into? Yet beneath the questions and doubts, a quiet resolve began to form. The years of running, of hiding, suddenly felt hollow. Grace and Noah were here, real and undeniable, challenging the very foundation of his future. Ethan took a slow breath, steadying himself against the tide of emotions. "I need time," he said finally, not a plea but a promise. "Time to think, to understand." Grace gave a small, appreciative nod. "I'll give you that. But don't wait too long. Noah deserves more than silence." As the music swelled again and a group of guests approached, congratulating Ethan and Lily with warm smiles and raised glasses, Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle firmly on his shoulders. The future he had envisioned was shifting beneath him, and he stood at a crossroads he had never anticipated. Lily's radiant smile caught his eye from across the room, her expression as poised as ever. Yet now, Ethan saw it through a new lens, one tinged with complexity and uncertainty. The life they were about to build together was no longer a simple path forward. It was intersected by the past, by Grace and Noah, and by the questions that demanded answers. He turned back to Grace, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and caution. The distance between them was measured by years and choices, but the unspoken connection remained, an unfinished chapter waiting to be written. Ethan knew that the coming days would force him to confront truths he had long avoided. But for the first time in a long while, beneath the polished veneer and high society rituals, he felt something else, an opening, fragile yet real, to face the past and perhaps find a way forward. With a final glance at Noah, whose quiet gaze held a mixture of innocence and expectation, Ethan stepped back into the swirling tide of the celebration, his thoughts tangled and unresolved. The wedding, the future, the promises, all now shadowed by the undeniable reality of what had just surfaced. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan understood that nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan's eyes lingered on the boy standing beside Grace, the quiet presence casting an unexpected shadow over the gleaming ballroom. Noah, Grace had said his name softly, almost reverently, and yet Ethan felt as though the word itself carried a weight far heavier than any name should. The boy's features were so familiar, the same sharp jawline, the deep-set eyes that mirrored Ethan's own, stirring a complex swirl of emotions that he struggled to suppress. As the laughter and music continued around them, Ethan's mind raced to piece together a reality he had never imagined confronting here, on what was supposed to be the most celebrated day of his life. The boy's presence was like an anchor, pulling him back to a time he thought he had left behind, a time filled with promises and dreams that had unraveled far too soon. Noah shifted slightly, his gaze steady and unblinking as if searching Ethan's face for recognition, for answers that Ethan did not yet have the courage to give. The child's innocence contrasted sharply with the intensity of the moment, a silent question hanging between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Ethan swallowed hard, the room around him blurring as he grappled with the magnitude of this discovery. How long have you known?" he finally asked Grace, his voice low and cautious, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile balance they now stood upon. Grace's eyes met his without hesitation, a quiet strength in their depths. "Long enough to know that it was time you did, too," she replied, her tone steady but edged with vulnerability. "I've been careful, Ethan, protecting Noah, myself, and even you, from a truth that might have destroyed us all." Her words settled over him like a cold weight, the complexity of their intertwined pasts pressing in from every direction. Ethan's mind flashed back to those years, the late nights filled with whispered plans, the shared hopes for a future neither had fully claimed. He had believed that distance and silence could erase mistakes, that success would build a wall strong enough to keep the past at bay. But Noah was living proof that the past had never truly left. The child's existence was a silent testament to choices made and consequences left unspoken. Ethan's gaze shifted back to the boy, who now reached out tentatively to touch Grace's hand, seeking comfort and assurance. The sight struck a chord deep within him, a pang of unfamiliar tenderness mingling with the shock and confusion. Here was a life he had never known he had, a connection he had never imagined, and yet one that demanded acknowledgement. "What does this mean?" Ethan asked quietly, the question hanging heavy between them. "For us, for the wedding, for everything I thought I had planned?" Grace's expression softened, a bittersweet smile flickering across her lips. "It means that things are more complicated than either of us expected," she said gently. "But it also means that we have a choice, to face this truth, or to keep pretending that it doesn't exist." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. The carefully constructed future he had envisioned was now fractured, and the path ahead was uncertain. He glanced toward Lily, who was mingling with guests nearby, her laughter light and unaware of the turmoil brewing just steps away. The thought of shattering that illusion filled Ethan with a cold dread. Yet, beneath the fear, a deeper part of him stirred, a yearning for honesty, for a chance to reconcile the man he had become with the life he had left behind. Grace's voice broke through his thoughts. "There's more," she said quietly. "Noah has questions, Ethan. About you. About who you are. He's old enough now to understand that there are pieces missing from his story." Ethan felt a sudden sharpness in his chest, the unfamiliar role of father flickering before him like a distant, fragile flame. He had never imagined this responsibility, nor the profound impact it would have on his carefully ordered existence. The notion of a child waiting for him, looking to him for answers, unsettled him in ways he hadn't expected. "Have you told him anything?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. Grace shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I introduced him to you. It was important to me that you were willing to be part of his life, in whatever way that might look." Ethan absorbed her words, feeling the enormity of the moment settle around him like a cloak. This was no longer a simple reunion. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape everything he thought he knew about himself and his future. A sudden movement caught his eye, Lily walking toward them, her eyes bright and curious. She smiled warmly at Grace, unaware of the undercurrent of tension that rippled just beneath the surface. Ethan felt a pang of guilt, realizing how fragile the balance was between the life he was about to commit to and the truth now standing before him. Lily extended her hand to Grace. "Thank you for everything you've done to make this day perfect," she said graciously. "I've heard wonderful things about your work." Grace accepted the handshake with a warm smile, though her eyes briefly flicked to Ethan, conveying a silent message of caution and hope. Ethan returned the smile, but inside, he felt the walls closing in, the weight of secrets poised to unravel the carefully laid plans. As the evening unfolded, Ethan found himself torn between two worlds, the polished facade of celebration and the fragile reality that Grace and Noah represented. The boy stayed close to Grace, occasionally stealing curious glances at Ethan, as though silently pleading for recognition. Ethan's thoughts were a tempest of confusion, guilt, and burgeoning resolve. He was acutely aware that the hours ahead would demand difficult choices, and that the truth he now held could no longer be contained within whispered memories and hidden rooms. Later, when the ballroom dimmed for a quiet moment, Ethan stepped aside to collect himself. The cool air of the corridor outside the grand hall was a stark contrast to the warmth and noise behind the doors. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady the whirlwind inside. The image of Noah's eyes haunted him, the child who bore his features, who carried a part of him he had never known. Ethan realized that this boy was more than a reminder of a past love. He was a living link to a future that demanded courage and honesty. As the strains of the string quartet drifted faintly through the walls, Ethan knew that the coming days would challenge everything he believed about loyalty, love, and responsibility. The revelation of Noah's existence was not just a surprise, it was a turning point, a call to confront the consequences of choices long made and to face a future irrevocably changed. Returning to the ballroom, Ethan resolved to find Grace again, to begin the conversation that had been set in motion by a single, startling moment. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with complexity and risk, but also with the possibility of redemption and connection. With a steadying breath, Ethan stepped back into the light, ready to confront the questions that could no longer be avoided, knowing that the life he had planned was now intertwined with a boy's quiet gaze and a woman's steadfast truth. Ethan found Grace near the edge of the ballroom, where the glow of chandeliers softened against the dark velvet curtains framing the windows. The music had shifted to a gentle waltz, couples twirling gracefully, oblivious to the tension coiling between them. Grace stood with Noah close by, the boy clutching her hand as if anchoring himself to her presence. Ethan's steps were measured, each one carrying the weight of the unspoken years that stretched between them. As he approached, Grace turned, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. The years since their last encounter had transformed them both. She carried an air of quiet strength tempered by the hardships they had endured, while Ethan bore the polished exterior of success, shadowed by the storm of emotions now churning beneath his composed facade. Noah glanced up at Ethan, his expression a curious blend of hope and uncertainty. The boy's presence seemed to give Grace a steadiness that Ethan hadn't yet found within himself. For a moment, the noise of the celebration faded into the background, leaving just the three of them suspended in an intimate, fragile space. Ethan cleared his throat, struggling to find the words that would bridge the gulf of years and silence. "Grace," he began, his voice low but earnest. I didn't know. I never imagined this." Grace nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "I know," she said softly. "It wasn't easy for me either, carrying this alone all these years. I wasn't sure if you'd want to be part of Noah's life when you found out." Ethan's heart tightened at the mention of Noah's name, the reality of fatherhood settling over him like a weight he had never anticipated. He looked down at the boy, who now watched him with wide, expectant eyes, seemingly searching for a sign, any indication that he belonged to this man standing before him. "I want to understand," Ethan said finally, voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I want to know everything. About you, about him, about us." Grace's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "It's a long story," she said. "One that's been filled with hope and heartache. But yes, it's time you knew." They moved to a quieter corner, away from the prying eyes and festive chatter. Grace began to recount the years since they had parted, how she had discovered she was pregnant shortly after Ethan left, the difficult decisions she faced alone, and the determination that had carried her through the uncertainty. She spoke of Noah's early years, the challenges of raising a child without Ethan's presence, and the protective shield she had built around them both. Ethan listened intently, the narrative unfolding like a tapestry of love and loss, resilience and regret. Each word etched itself into his consciousness, awakening feelings he had long suppressed: guilt for his absence, admiration for Grace's strength, and an aching desire to make amends. When Grace paused, Ethan reached out tentatively, his hand hovering before resting gently on hers. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything I missed, for not being there." She squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of the past and the possibility of forgiveness. "It's not about blame anymore," Grace replied. "It's about what we do now. Noah deserves that much." Noah shifted beside them, and Ethan knelt to meet his gaze. The boy's eyes were bright, searching, filled with questions that words had yet to express. Ethan felt an unexpected warmth stirring within him, a connection that transcended time and absence. "Do you want to ask me anything?" Ethan said softly, unsure if he was ready for the answers, but wanting to offer the invitation nonetheless. Noah hesitated, then nodded shyly. "Who are you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why weren't you with me?" Ethan's throat tightened. "I was scared," he admitted, the confession raw and honest. "Scared of not being enough, scared of losing everything I'd worked for. But I never stopped thinking about you." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing the truth with a maturity beyond his years. "I want to know you," Noah said simply. "I want you to be my dad." Ethan's eyes shimmered with unshed emotion. "I want that too," he promised. "I want to be here for you." Grace watched the exchange with a gentle smile, her hope tempered by cautious realism. "It won't be easy," she said. "There will be challenges, trust to rebuild, time to catch up. But if we're willing to try, maybe we can find a way." Ethan stood, looking down at the two people who now defined a part of his world he had never acknowledged before. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with complexity and potential heartache, but also brimming with the possibility of healing. Just then, a soft voice interrupted their moment. "Ethan, your bride is waiting," said a familiar event coordinator, stepping into the periphery with a polite smile. Ethan glanced toward the ballroom, where Lily stood surrounded by family and friends, her expression warm and expectant. The contrast between the life he had planned and the one now unfolding before him was stark, a reminder of the choices that lay ahead. Grace met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Whatever you decide," she said quietly, "know that Noah and I will be here, waiting." Ethan nodded, gratitude and uncertainty mingling within him. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with emotion, "for telling me the truth, for giving me a chance." As he turned to rejoin the celebration, Ethan felt the weight of the past lift slightly, replaced by a fragile hope. The future was no longer a straight path, but a winding journey, marked by the promise of redemption and the courage to face the unknown together. In that moment, beneath the glittering chandeliers and the watchful eyes of the city's elite, Ethan understood that some truths, no matter how difficult, were worth confronting. And some bonds, once broken, could be mended with time, honesty, and the willingness to forgive. Ethan retreated to a quiet corner of the estate's sprawling garden, the night air cool and crisp against his skin. The distant hum of the reception, the clinking of glasses, muted laughter, and soft music felt like echoes from another world, one he was no longer fully part of. The manicured hedges and delicate blooms, bathed in the subtle glow of lanterns, offered a brief refuge from the storm raging inside him. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The revelation of Noah's existence had shattered the carefully ordered life he had envisioned, leaving him adrift in a sea of doubt and uncertainty. The wedding he had anticipated with excitement now felt like a weighty performance, a facade he wasn't sure he could maintain. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. The screen displayed Lily's name. For a moment, Ethan hesitated, then silenced the call without answering. The image of her radiant smile, so full of hope and trust, clashed painfully with the secret now lodged between them. He knew he couldn't keep the truth hidden forever, not from Lily, not from himself. But the timing, the implications, the potential fallout, it all felt overwhelming. The life he had built, the future he had promised, now seemed fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. A voice behind him broke the silence. "Ethan?" He turned to see Grace approaching, her expression a mixture of concern and quiet strength. Noah followed close behind, clutching a small, worn toy in his hands. The boy's eyes met Ethan's briefly, a flicker of hope shining through the uncertainty. "I thought you might need some fresh air," Grace said softly. "It's a lot to take in." Ethan nodded, grateful for her presence yet burdened by the enormity of the situation. "I don't know how to move forward," he admitted, voice low. "Everything's changed." Grace stepped closer, her gaze steady. "It will take time," she said. "But you don't have to do this alone. Noah and we're here. We want to figure this out with you." The sincerity in her words struck a chord deep within Ethan. For so long, he had chased success and status, believing they could fill the void left by absence and silence. Now, faced with a son he had never known and a woman who had borne the weight of their shared past, he realized that ambition alone was not enough. Noah shifted beside Grace, then took a tentative step forward. Can we talk?" the boy asked, voice hesitant but determined. Ethan knelt to meet Noah's gaze, the boy's earnestness breaking through the walls Ethan had built around his heart. "Yes," he said quietly. "I want to listen." They moved to a nearby bench, the night cocooning them in privacy. Noah's questions came slowly at first, about Ethan's work, his life, and the reasons for his absence. Each answer Ethan gave was cautious, tinged with regret but laced with a growing determination to bridge the gap of lost years. As the conversation unfolded, Ethan felt the fragile beginnings of a bond forming. Noah's resilience and curiosity sparked something unexpected, a sense of purpose beyond the boardrooms and social gatherings he was accustomed to. Here was a connection that demanded honesty and presence, qualities he was only beginning to embrace. Meanwhile, back inside, the reception continued without him. Lily, surrounded by friends and family, noticed Ethan's absence but attributed it to pre-wedding nerves or a momentary need for solitude. She smiled politely when asked about him, unaware of the turmoil that had taken hold just beyond the ballroom doors. Hours slipped by as Ethan, Grace, and Noah talked late into the night. They shared stories, tentative plans, and cautious hopes for the future. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but for the first time, Ethan felt the stirrings of something real, an opportunity to rebuild, to make amends, and to embrace a new kind of success. When he finally re-entered the ballroom, the first light of dawn was creeping through the tall windows. Guests were beginning to depart, their conversations hushed, and the atmosphere subdued. Lily approached him, her eyes searching, a mixture of concern and confusion. "Ethan, is everything all right?" she asked softly. He looked at her, the weight of the night pressing heavily on his chest. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, voice steady despite the storm inside. He hesitated, then met her gaze with honesty. "About my past. About Grace. About Noah." Lily's expression shifted, surprise giving way to a fragile understanding. "I appreciate you telling me," she said quietly. "This changes everything, but I want to understand." Ethan nodded, relief mingling with the daunting task ahead. "I want to be honest with you, with myself and with them." The promise hung between them, fragile but sincere. Outside, the city was waking to a new day, and within Ethan, the first rays of clarity began to pierce the darkness. The road ahead would be difficult, marked by difficult conversations and hard choices, but it was a road he was determined to walk. As the guests filtered out and the last echoes of celebration faded, Ethan felt the weight of his decisions settle around him, not as a burden, but as a call to live authentically. The life he had once imagined was no longer possible, but a new chapter awaited, one defined not by appearances or ambition, but by truth, responsibility, and the tentative hope of a family reunited. Ethan sat across from Grace in a quiet corner of the cafe they had chosen for their meeting, a modest place far removed from the grandeur of the wedding venue, its warm lighting and familiar hum offering a stark contrast to the tension that still lingered between them. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but neither of them touched their drinks. Instead, they sat in a charged silence, the weight of their shared past hanging heavily in the space between them. Grace's eyes were steady, meeting Ethan's gaze without hesitation. "I wasn't sure you'd want to meet," she said softly, breaking the silence. "After everything that's happened." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his vulnerability. "Neither was I," he admitted. "But I can't keep running from this."
From you.
From Noah. The admission hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. For years, Ethan had buried the memory of Grace and the possibility of fatherhood beneath layers of ambition and denial. Now, sitting across from her, he felt the enormity of what he had missed, and the chance he still had to make things right. Grace nodded slowly. "Noah's been asking about you. About who his father is, why he's never been around. It's been hard for him." Ethan's chest tightened. "I wish I could have been there," he said quietly. "For him, for you. I was scared and selfish. But that's no excuse." She reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. "He needs you now," she said. "Not just as a name or a distant figure, but as a father." Ethan swallowed hard, the reality settling over him like a tide. I want to try." Grace's expression softened, a flicker of hope breaking through the years of guarded pain. "It won't be easy," she warned. "Noah's been through a lot. And so have I. Trust has to be rebuilt." Ethan nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "I'm ready for that. For whatever it takes." They spent the next hour talking not just about the past, but about the future. Plans began to take shape. Weekend visits, dinners, school events. Gradually, the walls that had kept them apart started to crumble, replaced by tentative gestures of trust and understanding. Grace shared stories about Noah's interests, his love of astronomy, his shy smile, the way he lit up when he talked about space exploration. Ethan listened, absorbing every detail, his mind painting a picture of the boy he was determined to know. As the conversation deepened, Ethan found himself opening up about his own fears and regrets. He spoke of the pressure he'd felt to succeed, the mistakes he'd made, and the loneliness that had haunted him despite his achievements. Grace listened without judgment, her presence a balm to wounds long ignored. At one point, Noah's voice echoed faintly from the hallway outside, followed by the sound of small footsteps. Grace looked toward the door and smiled. "He wanted to say goodbye," she explained softly. Ethan rose and stepped into the hallway, where Noah waited shyly, clutching a small model rocket. The boy's eyes met Ethan's with a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope. "Hi, Noah," Ethan said gently. "I'm glad to meet you." Noah nodded, a tentative smile breaking across his face. "I hope we can be friends," he said quietly. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, a connection that transcended the years of absence. "More than friends," he replied. "I want to be your dad." The boy's smile grew, and he reached out to shake Ethan's hand, a simple gesture that marked the beginning of something new. As they returned to the table, Grace's eyes met Ethan's, a silent acknowledgement of the journey ahead. The path would be difficult, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but for the first time, there was a shared commitment to face them together. Ethan left the cafe later that afternoon feeling a fragile hope blossoming within him. The walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crumble, replaced by the possibility of healing and connection. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he was ready to embrace it, not as a solitary figure chasing ambition, but as a father, a partner, and a man seeking redemption. As he walked away, the weight of the past lifted slightly, replaced by the promise of a new beginning forged in honesty, trust, and the quiet strength of a family reunited. The grand hall fell into a hush as Ethan stepped forward, the polished floor reflecting the glare of the crystal chandeliers above. The celebration had reached its peak. The laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, the whispered compliments, all paused abruptly, eyes turning toward the man who had commanded attention since the evening began. But this moment was different. The poised, confident entrepreneur who had been the center of the night's festivities now wore an expression heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan's gaze swept across the sea of faces, friends, family, business associates, and most painfully Lily. Her smile faltered as she noticed the tension etched across his features, the way his jaw tightened as if he were wrestling with a weight far greater than the occasion demanded. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, the air thickening with anticipation, curiosity, and unease. He cleared his throat, finding his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "There's something I need to say," he began, his words cutting through the charged silence. "Something that changes everything you think you know about tonight and about me." The room grew still, the gravity of his tone silencing even the softest whispers. Ethan's eyes met Lily's for a brief, fraught moment before he continued. "Grace," he said, nodding toward the woman standing at the edge of the room, "has been part of my life in ways I never fully acknowledged until now. And this," he gestured toward the small boy beside her, "is Noah, my son." Gasps erupted, shock rippling through the assembled guests like a sudden storm. Faces turned sharply toward Lily, whose eyes widened in disbelief and hurt. The carefully woven tapestry of celebration began to unravel before their eyes, exposing raw, tangled threads of secrets long buried. Lily's voice, when she spoke, was trembling but clear. "Ethan, why didn't you tell me?" He swallowed hard, the weight of her question pressing down on him. "I wanted to protect you from the past, from complications. But I realize now that the truth is something I can't hide, not from you, not from anyone." The room held its breath as Ethan took a step forward, the vulnerability in his voice belying the powerful image he usually projected. "I can't go through with this wedding, not without being honest about who I am and what my responsibilities are. I need to acknowledge Noah, to be the father he deserves. That means facing consequences, rebuilding trust, and accepting that my life will never be what I thought it would be." Whispers swelled into a chorus of shocked questions and murmurs. Some guests exchanged glances, others stared in stunned silence. Ethan's declaration had shattered the illusion of the perfect union, leaving the future uncertain and fragile. Lily's eyes glistened with tears, her composed facade crumbling. "So this changes everything," she said softly, the pain in her voice undeniable. "Are you saying you're walking away?" Ethan met her gaze firmly, the decision unshakable. "I'm saying I need to be true to myself, to my son, and to the life I'm meant to lead. I can't stand here and make promises that aren't real." The room seemed to tilt, the weight of his words settling over the crowd like a heavy fog. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the quiet sobs that escaped Lily's lips. Friends reached out to console her, while others looked to Ethan with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Grace stepped forward, her voice calm yet resolute. "This truth was kept from all of you for too long," she said. "But it's time to face it together. Noah deserves that much." Noah stood close by, his small hand clutching Grace's, eyes wide but steady. Ethan glanced down at him, feeling a surge of protectiveness and hope. This boy, who had changed everything, was now the center of his world. The wedding planner who had orchestrated the evening's perfection now became the bearer of an imperfect but necessary truth. The grandeur of the event paled in comparison to the raw humanity unfolding before the guests. As murmurs of support and skepticism mingled in the room, Ethan felt the weight of judgment and relief collide within him. The path ahead would be difficult, marked by broken hearts and shattered expectations, but it was a path he was ready to walk. He turned back to Lily, offering a final, sorrowful glance. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for the pain, the deception. But I can't live a lie, not anymore." She nodded, tears spilling freely now, her world unraveling in front of so many. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she whispered. Ethan stepped back, the eyes of the crowd following him as he moved toward Grace and Noah. The three of them stood together, a fragile new family amid the wreckage of old promises. The night's celebration had ended, replaced by the beginning of a complicated, uncertain journey. As the guests slowly dispersed, the echoes of Ethan's revelation lingered in the air, an indelible mark on the fabric of their lives. The future was no longer scripted or certain, but it was real, raw, and filled with the possibility of redemption and truth. Ethan knew the road ahead would test him in ways he hadn't imagined. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it, not as a man chasing status and success, but as a father, a partner, and someone willing to confront the consequences of his past. The night had shattered the illusion, but in the shards lay the promise of a new beginning. The days that followed Ethan's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions, public scrutiny, and private reckonings. News of the interrupted wedding had spread swiftly through the city's elite circles, conversations whispered behind closed doors, and headlines speculated about the scandal that had unfolded beneath the glittering chandeliers. Yet amidst the chaos, Ethan found a quiet determination growing within him, a resolve to face the consequences of his choices and build something genuine from the fragments of his fractured past. Grace and Noah became central to this new chapter, their presence both a challenge and a beacon of hope. Early morning breakfast at the local diner, afternoons spent at the park watching Noah chase after a soccer ball, and evenings filled with tentative conversations began to weave a fragile tapestry of family life. Ethan was learning to navigate the complexities of co-parenting with Grace, once lovers, now partners in a different kind of relationship, bound by shared responsibility and cautious trust. Darius, the chef from his past, had once stirred buried emotions in Marcus. Now, for Ethan, it was Grace who reawakened parts of himself he thought lost to ambition and time. Their interactions were often tentative, filled with moments of awkwardness and unspoken fears, but also with glimpses of understanding and mutual respect. Together, they sought to create a space where Noah could feel loved and secure, even as the world around them buzzed with gossip and judgment. Ethan's business associates were less forgiving. Board meetings were punctuated by pointed questions and sideways glances. Some questioned his focus, others doubted his capacity to lead amidst personal upheaval. Yet Ethan surprised them all by stepping back from the relentless pace of his corporate empire, choosing instead to invest in a new venture inspired by Grace's passion, a community culinary institute and restaurant that celebrated resilience, creativity, and second chances. The project became a symbol of their commitment, not just to each other but to a vision of life that valued authenticity over appearances. As they worked side by side, blending their dreams and skills, Ethan and Grace rediscovered a connection that transcended their past. It was imperfect, evolving, but real. Noah thrived in this environment, his shy smiles growing more frequent, his laughter filling the spaces once marked by silence. He learned to trust Ethan, to see him not just as a figure from stories but as a father who showed up, who listened, and who fought to be part of his life. Birthdays, school recitals, and quiet bedtime talks became the anchors of their new family rhythm. Amidst the challenges, Ethan and Grace also confronted their own feelings, navigating the fragile beginnings of a relationship rebuilt on honesty and shared purpose. There were moments of doubt, arguments born of exhaustion and fear, but also moments of tenderness and hope. They learned to communicate, to forgive, and to dream together once more. One evening, as they celebrated Noah's 8th birthday surrounded by friends and family, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The road had been fraught with pain and uncertainty, but it had also been filled with growth and unexpected joy. Watching Noah blow out the candles, his face alight with happiness, Ethan felt a profound gratitude, a recognition that true success was not measured in status or wealth, but in love and authenticity. As the party wound down, Ethan took Grace's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "We've come a long way," he said softly. Grace smiled, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight and the resilience that had carried them through. "And there's still more to come," she replied. Ethan nodded, his heart full. Together, they faced an uncertain future, but one grounded in truth and the bonds they had forged. The past no longer held them captive. It was a foundation upon which they built a new life, one defined by courage, connection, and the promise of family. With Grace and Noah by his side, Ethan felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey had transformed him, teaching that the greatest success was found not in the image he projected, but in the love he nurtured. Hand in hand, they stepped forward into the future, unwritten, unpredictable, and theirs to create. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.